And all these beings have been have contributed to our lives in a positive way, directly or indirectly. Either through being a friend or a parent, a teacher, a farmer, a truck driver, a doctor, a plumber, a lawyer. If we contemplate deeply, we'll get a deeper and deeper sense of how interconnected we are, and how we benefit from others' efforts in every minute of every day. And if beginningless lifetimes are true, then we've had countless parents, countless people who have taken care of us, countless people who have, or beings who have worried about us, who have deeply loved us. And it's possible that each sentient being has been that kind parent. And even though each being wants happiness and doesn't want suffering, they don't have much control over that. They experience pain and problems over and over again. And will continue to do so endlessly. Until they get out of samsara. So seeing if we can develop a sense of compassion for all beings, even the difficult ones. And develop a wish to develop our own inner qualities further and further. And achieve full awakening, complete enlightenment. in order to be of benefit, and in order to help free others from this endless cycle of suffering. All right. Okay. Actually, hold on a second. I want to change the view on my screen so I can see people. Okay, so today is our last class on bodhicitta. As we've talked about, the bodhicitta is the most expansive heart. It's the deepest, widest compassion for every single living being that takes responsibility for freeing others from suffering, not just temporary suffering, but also ultimate suffering, freeing, taking responsibility for freeing all beings from this cycle of samsara, and realizing that oneself is limited in our ability to do that now. And so it's bodhicitta is the compassionate wish to achieve complete enlightenment for the welfare of all sentient beings. Yeah, and so as we've discussed, and hopefully you have your handout, there are the two main methods for developing bodhicitta, which is the sevenfold cause and effect method and the equalizing, exchanging self and others. And then there's a combined method, which is the 11-point method. So the 7-point cause and effect method is, we're encouraged to practice both methods because each method has its own kind of strengths, and its own, its own strengths. And the sevenfold cause and effects, the strength of that meditation is to help us develop this sense of affection toward all beings, a sense of, warmth, sense of closeness, sense of, of all beings being attractive. So we start with the sevenfold cause and effect, and then we jumped over to the equalizing and exchanging self and others, which equalizing, exchanging self with others is an excellent, very powerful method of getting at the self-centered attitude that is the source of, the underlying source of all of our problems and pain and samsara, according to the Dharma, right? It's the belief in the concrete separate self, and then cherishing that self or being preoccupied with that self, being more focused on the me as being more important than others. And so the equalizing, exchanging self with others switches our focus. So initially we meditate on equalizing self and others, and we consider others as being just as important as us, right? Their happiness is just as important. Their suffering is just as important. Their success is just as important. Their comfort is just as important. Their well-being is just as important. Their needs and their wants are just as important as ours, right? So that's a huge step from um, from the beginning of cherishing ourselves as most important, to considering others as equal in importance. And then we meditate on the disadvantages of the self-centered attitude and the advantages of cherishing others. And we see that the self-centered attitude is actually it only causes us problems in the long term, right? It underlies all of our mental afflictions, our anxiety, our anger, our fear, our jealousy, our obsessive attachment, etc. And it causes us to create negative karma. It causes us conflict with others. It causes us to do and say things that we later regret. We hurt those that we love. We aren't there for those that we love in the way we want to be or would like to be because of this self-centered attitude, this attachment, like this over attachment to the me and the mine. So we contemplate the disadvantages of self-centered attitude until that, we really understand that on a deep level, at the pore level, at the, in our deepest psyche, we understand that self-centered attitude really is the biggest troublemaker in our lives. That along with the self-grasping, the belief in the concrete separate self. And then we contemplate the benefits of cherishing others and how when we're really there for others, when we deeply care about others, without attachment, when we're really focused on others, that brings the greatest joy, that brings the greatest meaning in life, and actually that brings us lightness and our highest, that brings us to our highest potential, that brings us to enlightenment. Yeah. And it turns out, right, the path to our highest happiness, the path to our enlightenment, the path to our greatest joy is going beyond our narrow self, right, and cherishing others more and more. So we need to contemplate that to be convinced in our own minds. Like all subjects in the Dharma, we need to make the understanding our own, right? Merely reading about it, merely hearing teachings about it, isn't going to deeply change our minds, right? What deeply changes our minds is doing the reflection ourselves and making that wisdom our own. Yeah. And so we can only do that by doing the reflection. Oh, yeah. And then, yeah. And then we get to actually exchanging self and others. So that step 8, I think it's step 8 in the 11-point method. Yeah, step 8 at the actual exchange of self and others is exchanging our self-centered attitude, exchanging the attitude of being mostly occupied with my own needs, my own wants, my own security, my own success, my own comfort. and turning that on its head. And instead of being mainly occupied with me and mine, being mainly occupied with others, others' happiness, others' needs, others' wants, others' success, others' comfort, others' happiness, others' suffering. Yeah. So that's a huge step. And as we talked about last week, I mean, we spent the whole class last week talking about the pitfalls of doing that, and how we need to do that in a healthy way, right? In a way where we're actually organically growing our own, yeah, our own capabilities, our own capacity, so that we naturally expand out to others. So in order to do that in a healthy way, it needs to be based on a healthy sense of love for ourselves, a sense of acceptance toward ourselves, um, healing, healing our emotional wounds so that we're not unconsciously helping others to feed ourselves, right? Or to heal ourselves, right? We need to work with our own stuff in order to truly be there in a beneficial way for others, right? And we can do both at the same time. Right? Oftentimes, I think we want to skip over, right? Skip over and skip to the highest teaching, right? Jump over working on our own stuff, just jump to the highest teaching. Oh, well, equalizing, exchanging self and others. Well, that's the higher teaching. So let's just do that. But it doesn't work well when we do that. The whole bypassing, spiritual bypassing, bypassing our own issues ends up causing problems in the end, right? Yeah, we need to grow our capacity in a step-by-step gradual way. I wanted to read this quote by Jack Kornfield, the famous Vipassana teacher. He says that expanding our spiritual practice is actually a process of expanding our heart, of widening our circle of insight and compassion to gradually include the whole of our life. Sometimes we must heal our own wounds first to come to some inner well-being, but eventually we experience a natural movement to serve, to give back to the world. There's this other quote by Suzuki Roshi, who was a Japanese Zen master who came to the United States, I think in the 60s or the 70s. And one of his famous quotes is, "We study ourselves to forget ourselves." Right? So we study ourselves, we study our own mind, ultimately to forget ourselves, to go beyond the narrow self. And there's this other quote by Bernard Shaw, who says that we, as we progress, we become more and more indifferent to ourselves. So as we progress along the spiritual path, and especially along the Mahayana path, right, we're developing our own inner wellness, right? We're reducing our mental afflictions. We're reducing, and sometimes psychotherapy can be helpful, if we have certain traumas from growing up, or certain wounds that we need to heal. But as we heal those wounds, and as we reduce our mental afflictions, and as we grow in our understanding of interdependence, and as we grow in our love and compassion for others, then gradually we develop an inner wellness And we have this kind of natural instinct to serve more and more. Yeah. Okay. So let's see. So the actual exchange in self and others, just as a review, besides being based on a genuine love and compassion for ourselves and an inner, like a sense of inner well-being, it's also based on a sense of genuine caring for others, right? As we learn to care about others more and more, then we want to naturally focus more on others' well-being and less on our own. And ideally, serving others is not about me at all, right? It's not, it's serving because there's a need, serving because there's pain, serving because we think it'll help and not harm the other. And it's, right, and we're not expecting any sort of reward in return, right? We're not expecting appreciation or acknowledgement or a favor in return. And we're not expecting, ultimately, we're not even expecting an internal reward, right? Feeling good about myself, being a good person. Of course, naturally, we will, we will feel good about ourselves, etc. But that's not why we do it, right? And we're not expecting, and we're not doing it in order to feel good about ourselves. We're just doing it because it needs to be done. Yeah. And then not holding ourselves above the other, right? Not lording over and thinking that we're better, and not trying to fix the other, not trying to save the other, not helping, from a higher stance, right? But treating the others as, with respect, with dignity. Yeah. So then the next step is love and compassion, right? So in the sevenfold cause and effect, as well as in, in the 11 point, right? There's, once we have like some level of equanimity, once we have some level of affectionate love, and then, we've contemplated on the disadvantages of, once then we've equalized, and then we contemplate on the disadvantages of the self-centeredness and the advantages of cherishing others, etc. Then we actually work on love and compassion, and the love wishing others to have happiness, and the compassion wishing others to be free from suffering. So this love wishing others to have happiness is different from the affectionate love, right? The affectionate love is a sense of warmth and caring toward others. But the love in this, in the love and compassion, is a wish for the other to have happiness. And so it can be, there's no fixed order. Lama Tsongkhapa says there's no fixed order. It's not necessarily that you have to develop love first and then compassion. You can do compassion first and then love. And really, the love and compassion are two sides of the same coin. So I'm going to talk about those two a little bit separately first, and then in the context of Tonglen, the giving and taking practice, which is a practice of love and compassion together, a more powerful practice of love and compassion, and the Tonglen is a practice of love and compassion that gets directly at the self-centered attitude. So love. So this is, wishing sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness, right? Not just temporary happiness, but also ultimate happiness. So wishing that people who are homeless to have a home, to have food, to have comfort, right? Wishing that sick people have health and strength, wishing that poor people have, money, job, etc. Right? So temporary happiness. Also wishing them to have the causes of happiness. So, practicing, you know, wholesome actions and having wholesome states of mind, right? So that, and then also wishing them to have ultimate happiness, wishing them to have the ultimate happiness of liberation and enlightenment, right? The stable, lasting happiness. So we're wishing happiness on all of those different levels. And Lama Tsongkhapa, he says something very interesting. And he says that love involves recognizing that sentient beings are currently lacking in happiness. And that really struck me when I read, when I read that some years ago, is because, my habit, and maybe most people's habits, is, when I imagine sentient beings, or when I see sentient beings, habitually in my life, I've always kind of assumed that they were happy, relatively happy. Right? If I bring sentient beings to my mind, I don't necessarily see them as lacking happiness. Right? But one thing that we do as we contemplate the Lam Rim is we contemplate suffering, we contemplate, right, the condition of being in samsara, and we understand more and more deeply how all beings are suffering on some level. And so when we understand that all beings are lacking happiness, right? All beings, the happiness that they have is temporary. It's not going to last. And the happiness that they have is tempered by uncertainty. It's tempered by having the mental afflictions, right? As long as they have mental afflictions, they'll have dissatisfaction. As long as they have mental afflictions, they'll have agitated minds. As long as they have mental afflictions, they won't have peace of mind. As long as they have mental afflictions, they'll create negative karma. As long as they create negative karma, they will create the causes for more suffering. So as long as they're a sentient being, they have mental afflictions. And as long as they're a sentient being, they have suffering. They either have gross suffering or they have subtle suffering. And as long as they're a sentient being, they will continue to create causes for the further suffering. And they won't have lasting happiness until they reach liberation or enlightenment. Yeah. So we familiarize ourselves with the suffering of samsara to the point where we naturally see sentient beings as suffering. We naturally see that even people in good circumstances have the seed of suffering, have suffering and have the seed of suffering, right? And as I mentioned over the summer, suffering is not, like, the suffering of others is not obvious, right? It's right. right? We have a culture in which people try to present, well, and we have the instinct to present ourselves as being okay, right? Like people ask you how you're doing. Oh yeah, I'm okay. People walking down the street, right? It's not obvious. I mean, most people who are walking down the street, it's not obvious that they're suffering, right? So we have to go underneath and see, oh, well, actually, they all have dissatisfaction. They all have stress. They all have some level of anxiety. They all have, right, the seeds of anger. They all have attachment. They all have a grasping to the me and the mine. Right? They all have some level of agitation in their minds, and they all have, future suffering. If they're not suffering on a growth level now, they will in the future. They all have to age. They all have to die. They all have to take uncontrolled rebirth until they're very high along the spiritual path, right? And who knows what their future lives are going to bring, right? Right, we all have to get sick. We all have to lose our loved ones, right? So the more we contemplate that, which is uncomfortable to contemplate, right? We don't like to contemplate suffering. It's painful, and right, we'd rather think about happy things, right? But when we're in denial about our own suffering, then we don't, our own suffering now or our own suffering, possible suffering in the future, then we don't take care to prevent that future suffering, or we don't take care to minimize that future suffering. Yeah. And then when we don't think about the suffering of others, then we can't develop compassion for others. Yeah. So if we want to develop compassion for others, then we need to develop kind of this inner strength and this inner tolerance, and courage to think about suffering. Yeah. So, so with love, love or loving kindness, we recognize that sentient beings are suffering and they lack the lasting happiness, the stable happiness, um, the genuine happiness that comes from um, having control over our minds, right? Having reduced or eliminated our mental afflictions, right? So they lack happiness. And so then we wish, with loving kindness, we wish them, may you have happiness. Or actually, there's the three levels. How wonderful it would be if you have, if you have happiness and the causes of happiness. And then the next level is stronger. May you have happiness and the causes of happiness. And then the strongest level, as our love increases, I myself will cause you to have happiness and the causes of happiness, right? So taking responsibility, right? If we love another enough, we take responsibility for their happiness, right? Like the parent for their child, or for our partners, or for our good friends, right? We're willing to take responsibility to help you have happiness. So those are the three levels of happiness. And then with or three levels of love. And then with compassion, it's wishing sentient beings to be free from that suffering, free from the causes of suffering, free from the mental afflictions, free from the grasping at the me, free from their anxiety, free from their dissatisfaction, and free from their feeling of helplessness, free from their physical pain and free from their sickness and free from, right, free from their low self-esteem, free from their lack of control, right? So we're getting in touch with their pain and their suffering, right? And we can get in touch with their pain and their suffering intellectually by understanding, right? So trying to put ourselves in their shoes and understanding what they're going through, kind of intellectually, which is like called cognitive empathy. And then also there's an emotional empathy, which is actually feeling with the other person, feeling what the other person or the other being is going through. And I find that the getting in touch with the feeling is a much more powerful way to develop compassion than just merely intellectually understanding their pain. So when I'm like doing the Tonglen practice, or when I'm doing compassion practice, like trying to get in touch with, okay, well, what is their pain, right? What is their emotional pain, or what is their physical pain, or like imagining what it would be like to be, laying in a hospital bed and struggling to breathe and having, being connected to machines and, having so much discomfort in our bodies. Or imagining what it's like to be, right? To be the other person, right? What are they feeling? Like, are they feeling fear, right? Are they feeling helplessness? Are they feeling insecure? Are they feeling anxiety? Are they feeling stress? Are they feeling overwhelmed? Are they feeling powerless? Are they feeling, right, so many different, right, loss? Are they feeling grief? Are they feeling sad? Are they feeling angry? Right, so trying to get in touch with that feeling, not just intellectually, but that painful feeling, brings a much stronger level of compassion. And then, so that's the suffering of suffering. And with the compassion, we're encouraged to really have a deep understanding of the three levels of compassion, right? The suffering of suffering. So the suffering of change, right? So that, whatever pleasure they're experiencing right now will change to discomfort, will change to pain. Whatever pleasure that they're experiencing right now will, is impermanent. And then the pervasive compounded suffering is, right, that, as we discussed, it's that the very condition of having this kind of a body and mind, the very condition of having this body and mind that's conditioned by karma and the afflictions, right? Just by virtue of having this contaminated body and mind, we have the potential for future suffering. So, yeah, so understanding those three levels of suffering. Geshe Sopa says that we need to think about the suffering of samsara in hundreds and thousands of ways, because one's compassion and love is in proportion to one's understanding of others' suffering. If we do not see that others have a problem, or just acknowledge that they have a little difficulty, the strength of our compassion will be weak. Meditating on suffering in great detail brings a special urgency, power, and spontaneity to love and compassion. Therefore, we need to think about many aspects of suffering to make our compassion strong. We consider these for a long time to make our compassion stable. Yeah. And if we try, like, if we just start by thinking about just others' suffering and not our own, he says we won't develop compassion from the heart. So, okay, so obviously this is very uncomfortable. We don't like to think about suffering. Normally we like to keep quite distant from suffering, keep suffering at a distance. Like one thing I really noticed, like in downtown Santa Cruz, near where I live, there's a lot of homeless people, and a lot of them have, right, substance abuse problems or mental health issues. Right. And walking by a homeless person is uncomfortable, or walking by someone who's yelling, right, out of their mental illness is really uncomfortable. And I notice the instinctive response to stay away, right? Because we don't like to be around suffering, right? And so then when I remember, I try to, remember my love and compassion, and remember my like tonglen, or just, loving kindness. We can just, wish them, may you have happiness, may you have happiness, may you have happiness, may you have happiness, may you have happiness. And that, that brings the suffering person closer, right? So with love and compassion, we're not keeping the other person at this great distance, right? We're bringing that suffering being closer to us. And that goes against the grain, right? That goes against our habit of, well, oh yeah, there's pain, let's stay away from that. So it takes strength and it takes courage to contemplate suffering, our own as well as others. Yeah. So His Holiness Dalai Lama says, if we don't first identify suffering well, there is no way for compassion to be anything but partial. Right? So if we have a little bit of understanding of compassion, then we have a little bit of if we have a little bit of understanding of suffering, then we can have a little bit of compassion. If we have a great amount of understanding of suffering, there's a potential for a great amount of compassion. So compassion, I think of compassion as needing to be based on two things. The first thing is a feeling of caring or affectionate, right? The affectionate love, attractive love, a feeling, right? Caring about the other. And then secondly, understanding that they're suffering, right? And so when I find myself lacking in compassion, it's useful for me to look at those two factors and see, okay, well, what is missing for me? Do I not have much caring for that person? And if the caring is missing, then it's very helpful to do the meditations on, right, how they want to, how they just want to be happy, just like me, the kindness of others, or that they're like my, my best friend, or my brother or sister, or they've been my mother or my father or my best friend, right? So developing greater sense of caring for the other, greater sense of affectionate love for the other, right? Or oftentimes, like, the compassion doesn't develop. Like if someone that we're really close to, like the compassion doesn't arise because we're not really in touch with their suffering, their pain. Then it's very useful to put more contemplation in the suffering. And it's very easy to forget how much others are suffering. So, and we can contemplate their suffering, their past suffering, their present suffering, as well as their future suffering. Right, their future old age, their future death, their future losing their loved ones, right? Their future, cancer, their, right? So that the condition of samsara means that they will suffer in the future, and many times. So we need to contemplate suffering kind of to the extent that it makes us uncomfortable and it brings up empathy and compassion. But not so much, I mean, I think, not so much that it's overwhelming. I think, we need to find the right balance. And when we study, we'll be studying Joan Halifax's book that we talked about last time, starting next February. And one of the factors she talks about, one of the edge states she talks about, is empathy. So empathy is, the feeling with, right? There's the cognitive empathy, which is understanding the other's pain. And then there's the emotional empathy, which is feeling with, right? What they're feeling. But she also talks about going over the edge on empathy and falling into empathic distress. So we don't want to fall over the edge with our empathy. She says that she doesn't think that we can fall over the edge with compassion, because compassion has the active component. So compassion is based on empathy, but compassion adds the wish that the other be free from suffering. It adds the willingness to do something to help them be free from suffering. So empathy is, being with the other's suffering, and compassion is adding the active component of wishing that they're free from suffering, or I myself will cause you to be free from suffering. So we need to contemplate the suffering to the point that we can, that we find it. I mean, Geshe Sopa says we need to contemplate it until we find the suffering unbearable, right? But I think maybe not so much that it's just too overwhelming. But enough that kind of gets us to want to do something about it. Yeah. So we need to be able to stay grounded, right? When we encounter someone suffering, sometimes, like we talked about last week, we get this knee jerk reaction. Well, I have to do something to help, but we need to stay grounded and be able to bear witness to that suffering, and maintain the clarity of mind in order to think about what is actually beneficial in that situation, right? Because the idea, right, is to help others to help themselves, not to have others become dependent on us, right? But help them help themselves, right? Help them generate their own inner strength and their inner well-being, or access their own inner strength. Okay. And there's this quote by Chogyam Trungpa. I don't remember. Well, actually, there's two quotes that come to mind about the amount of suffering that beings are experiencing. Geshe Sopa says something like, we are like children who don't understand the depths of the ocean. Yeah, I think I butchered that quote. But anyways, it's like our understanding of suffering is like a child who has no understanding of how deep and vast the ocean is. And Trungpa Trungpa has a quote of, something like, we have half a grain of sand's worth of understanding of the suffering in this country alone, let alone in all of samsara. So compassion, developing a sense of courage to face suffering more, such that we can, we want to do something about it. So once again, with compassion, like love, there's the three levels, right? How wonderful it would be if sentient beings were free from suffering and its causes. May they be free from suffering and its causes, and I myself will cause them to be free from suffering and its causes. So as we do the contemplations further and further, we move along, those levels to the point where ultimately we can develop great compassion, which is the great compassion, wishing that all beings without exception be free from suffering, right? So we contemplate love and compassion based on, right, friends, strangers, or neutral beings, and then the difficult beings, like in equanimity, right? Those three categories of beings, beginning with the easiest, the friends and the loved ones, and then moving to the neutral beings, and then moving to the difficult beings, and then moving to all sentient beings. And then Geshe Sopa says, as we become really experienced, then we can go back and forth, and go back to then the difficult beings, developing compassion, love and compassion for difficult beings, then the neutral beings, and then the friends, and kind of going back and forth, and really developing the strength of mind and the flexibility of mind. Yeah. So we start obviously with the easiest ones, and try to develop some authentic love and compassion. And oftentimes we'll do these practices and nothing will shift in our hearts, right? Our hearts won't open. It'll still feel like our hearts are closed or like stone. But not to get discouraged, right? We're planting, seeds. We're planting imprints in our minds, and slowly, those imprints will come to fruition, right? Because every time we plant those seeds, we're creating causes. We're creating causes to deepen our love and compassion, even if it doesn't manifest right now. We're putting those drops in the bucket. Yeah, like there's this quote by Geshe Sopa, right? We need to do these practices, the love and compassion practices, over and over again, because just doing it once or twice or a few times isn't going to be enough to make any sort of substantial change in our hearts. And he says, so we need to do it over and over again over a long period of time. And he says, like, just a few sprinkles of sugar won't make a bitter lemon sweet. Okay, you just have to keep adding sugar, right? Sprinkles of sugar, and then eventually that lemon turns sweet. And similarly, doing these practices, eventually they bear fruit, and eventually we'll have, spontaneous love and compassion for all beings, and even the most difficult beings. Yeah. and right, and not skipping the difficult beings, right, and contemplating, right, and contemplating people in animals individually is much more powerful than in like en masse, right? So contemplate, right? Contemplate, may you have happiness, may you have happiness, may you have happiness to, your partner, to your children, to your mother, right? To your coworkers, to, your neighbors, to the grocery store workers, right? Contemplate them with regard to the politicians that we have difficulty with, or the relatives that we have difficulty with, or the coworkers that we have difficulty with, or the animals, the insects that we have difficulty with, the screaming children that we have little patience for, right? So, doing these contemplations. Yeah. Okay. So that's love and compassion. And then there's the Tonglen practice, which, so in the sevenfold cause and effect, we do love and compassion separately, right? We do love, may you have happiness, may you have happiness, may you have happiness, may you have, and imagine giving the other, what they need. And in compassion, may you be free from suffering, may you be free from suffering, may you be free from suffering. In the Tonglen practice, we bring those two together in the singular practice of Tonglen, of imagining, right? We imagine the beings suffering until we generate, kind of a heartfelt feeling, ideally a heartfelt feeling for their suffering. And then, right, we imagine taking away their pain, taking away their anxiety, taking away from their stress, taking away their insecurity, taking away their helplessness, right? Taking away their samsara, right? In the form of, and you can imagine that pain or that suffering, in the form of, dark smoke, or dark, like sooty, dirty liquid, or mist, right? So we imagine taking that away. And then the ideal way, right, with the Tonglen is the Tonglen also adds the destroying of the self-centeredness, right? So we're actually taking the suffering into ourselves, and imagining our self-centered attitude, right, as a rock in the center of our hearts, right? That's being either destroyed, like destroyed, like shattered to bits when we bring that suffering into ourselves, or like lightning destroying it, or it could be, we could see what works for us. It could be like what I was saying the other week, like vinegar like gradually dissolving the the mineral deposits, right? So whatever works for you. So taking away the suffering, bringing it in and destroying the self-centeredness at our hearts, and then, then switching to love and imagining, okay, well, what do they need? Giving them happiness, giving them peace of mind, giving them health, giving them, inner wellness, right? Giving them food, giving them, right, money, right? So we take away the suffering, destroy the self-centeredness of the heart, and give them what they need. So we begin with the taking away the suffering, when we give with bringing the taking and then the giving, right? Taking and then the giving. And I heard a Dharma teacher say recently, and I agree with this, is that sometimes we try to do the Tonglen practice, right? Taking and then giving and taking and then giving and taking and the way giving. And it can be quite superficial, right? Because we're thinking about the suffering for a few seconds and then immediately we were switching to giving them happiness. And then our compassion can be quite on the surface, right? We're not really deeply thinking about their suffering, their pain. So it can be useful to do those separately, one at a time, and just do the taking for a while. And if we're not ready to bring it in ourselves yet, then we can just, do the taking away without bringing it in ourselves yet. But then it won't be the true Tonglen. It won't be destroying the self-centeredness of the heart. It'll be more like in the sevenfold cause and effect method. But of course, we have resistance to taking the suffering in. And I forgot to mention, right, we're destroying the self-centeredness of the hearts and then having our bodies fill with like soft golden light or yeah, we don't want to keep the dark smoke in ourselves. We don't want to keep negative energy in ourselves, right? So we transform that dark smoke into soft golden light or soft white light, whatever works for you. So it can be very useful to really spend some time on the taking and then spend some separate time on the giving. And then the practice goes deeper, right? So the idea is to start with friends again, and then neutral beings, and then difficult beings, and then all sentient beings. And if we're not ready to do that with friends, we can begin with ourselves, right? And taking away our own suffering, taking away our future suffering. And that practice can be really, really a wonderful practice. I personally haven't done a whole lot of that one, but I've done a little bit, and I can see how it can be really beneficial to imagine our future suffering, like imagine our future old age and take that away, right? Imagine our future sickness, take that away. Imagine our future death and take that on, right? And like develop it, like it can develop a courage to face our future suffering, right? Because we don't want to look at that, right? So even just taking on, right? Taking, imagine that future suffering and taking it away, the suffering of being in the bardo, etc. So yeah. I think you've all had teachings on the Tonglen practice before. I think Venerable Rabina did that recently for you guys. So I don't think we need to go into a whole lot more detail on that. But wondering if anybody has any questions or comments on what we've covered so far. And then we'll actually do a meditation on Tonglen. Or if you have any resistance. Of course, we have resistance to meditating on suffering.
Hi, this is Heather. I really resonate with the idea of just the unconditional presence being something that you can actually do for someone to be of benefit. And when I think about it, I think about when I started working in race consciousness, doing race consciousness work as a white woman, my tendency as a human being is to fix things and to save people. But when it was applied to this context of racial equity, it was very clear to me in a very painful way that that was not helpful and not wanted and not held up as a virtue at all. In fact, it was quite the opposite. And so what was needed from me was to be present with someone else's suffering and to understand it. And one of the ways I started studying radical dharma, which is around race consciousness, and the African American teacher, Reverend Angel Kyoto, talked about it it said this was a really beautiful way for me to understand how to get started in bodhicitta in that respect was, it is too late and it will never be enough, but you can nevertheless make a start. And it was a strange way to think about it, but it was really resonated with me because it put me at a right size of, I cannot fix this by myself, but I can make a start. And it's really quite beautiful. And then I think about, just briefly, like when my husband died, it became so clear to me in a different context, the way people would react that were so uncomfortable with bearing witness to my pain, that they would try to fix it. And there was something well-intentioned but condescending, that you can fix something that I can't fix. And by contrast, like those same African American women could just hold my suffering and just let me cry and just let me, this is what I'm going through. And I don't want to start crying, but those are the things that started to come up for me when you're talking about, the power of just presence with someone.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. Yeah, it's so rare, isn't it? It's so rare to encounter someone who's able to just bear witness with our pain and not give us advice or try to fix it, or but just listen empathically. But that's what we need many times. That's just what we need. We have to go through suffering, and it's not fixable. Yeah, and so if we can do that for others, it's a huge gift. It's a huge gift. I remember a few years ago, I participated in a nonviolent communication group. I don't know if you're familiar with nonviolent communication, but one aspect of it is empathic listening, learning how to just listen empathically. And the facilitator of this group was really wonderful, and people would bring up whatever their challenges, their challenge with their husband, their challenge with their child, and he would listen, right? He would listen, and and ask, well, can is it okay if I ask you, are you right? Are you feeling frustrated, right? Are you feeling helpless? No, are you feeling loss, right? Are you right? And it was amazing to see how transformative that was for people, right? And how much healing there was for people just to be listened to and to be heard and seen, right? Without trying to fix it, right? Without trying to fix it, but are you feeling right? Are you feeling right? And you have to be careful, right, not to violate their boundaries. They might not want you to ask those questions, but so he would check first to see, okay, well, is it okay? And one gentleman who was in his 70s, he said, no one has ever listened to me like that in my whole life. Right? Nobody has ever listened to me like that in my whole life. And it was, it was really, yeah, it was, it was mind blowing for me to see how healing that was for people. And it really inspired me to want to be able to be like that for people, but it's a process. Right? I mean, it's a process, right? It's hard to not just jump in and try to give advice or fix something. Yeah, and it requires a lot of paying attention. And I think that that's an excellent practice, right? Just empathic listening. It's an excellent practice. Bodhicitta practice. It's an excellent practice in exchanging self and others. Yeah, anyway, so thank you, Heather, for sharing that. Anybody else have anything? If not, we'll go into the Tonglen practice. And if you don't mind, the class will need to go a little bit late because we started a little bit late. So, yeah, if you need to leave, feel free to leave. But I would say, an extra 10 or 15 minutes. So maybe going till noon, if that's okay. Is that okay, Anthony? Because you're the host. Sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, that's just fine for me. Works for everyone else. And if it doesn't work for anyone, feel free to just kind of drop off, and we'll be thinking of you as well.
Okay. I won't go over noon, but and I just want to cover a few last things and give us a chance to do the Tonglen practice.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah. So let's sit in our meditation posture. And relaxed. Just focusing on our breath. So imagine right in front of us someone that we really care about who's going through a difficult time. Maybe they're sick. Maybe they're really stressed. Maybe they're afraid. Maybe they're feeling overwhelmed. So spend a few minutes really contemplating, right? Trying to put yourself in that person's shoes and trying to understand what they may be going through. And then also try to access what they might be feeling. So understanding intellectually what they may be going through, and then trying to access what they're feeling, if it's overwhelm or if it's physical pain, if it's anxiety, all of the different emotions they may be feeling. Try to really get in touch with and resonate with those feelings. And then imagine their pain or their suffering or their anxiety, their overwhelm, their stress in the form of kind of dark smoke. And imagine taking all of that away from them. And we can imagine, taking it away from them and immediately bringing it inside us, or just we can imagine that black smoke, gathering in front of us until they're completely free from that pain. And then bringing that black, dark smoke in us. And the rock of self-centeredness and of self-centered attitude is in the center of our chest. And imagine that black smoke coming in and destroying that self-centeredness and filling our bodies with golden light. And let's do that for a few minutes, imagining their pain, taking it away, and destroying the self-centeredness in our hearts and our bodies filling with soft golden light. And then imagine the relief on their face, the relief in their body, to be free from that pain or that stress, be free from that suffering. And then we'll switch to the giving part. So that golden light that fills our body, imagine sending that out to them, sending them whatever they need, peace of mind, a healthy body, inner wellness, food, money, home, job. So spending a few moments doing the giving whatever they need. Imagine, think about what it is that they need, and giving that to them. So practice those two together. So imagining suffering, taking that away, destroying the self-centeredness at our hearts, and then giving happiness, wellness, comfort, strength, and then expanding that out to include all beings, right? All beings suffering in a similar way. All beings who are stressed are all taking away all the anxiety, all the stress, all the pain, all of the fear, all of the hunger, all of the heartbreak, all of the, betrayal, all of the cancer. Taking that in, destroying the self-centeredness in our hearts, and giving health and wellness and peace of mind, and respect and consideration, care, love, healing. And taking away all the pain and suffering, the anxiety and the stress, the heartbreak, the sickness, the Alzheimer's, the panic, the helplessness, the overwhelm, destroying the self-centeredness at our hearts and breathing out and giving good health and wellness, strength, love, peace of mind, money, job, Breathing in, taking away all others' pain and their heartbreak and their insecurity, their helplessness, their shame, their cancer, their fear. Breathing out, sending love and wellness, peace, kindness, jobs, money, mental health, homes. So we'll spend a few moments doing this quietly. Can spread to neutral beings and then even difficult ones. And we can also do this for any pain or stress that we're going through now. We can imagine all the other beings who are experiencing something similar. It might be some sort of physical pain or emotional pain or stress, overwhelm, insecurity. Just imagine taking on everyone else's pain. Like I have to experience this, so I'll experience this for others so they don't have to. So the breathing in and taking away all of their similar pain or stress. And then giving them whatever they need. Okay, any questions or comments on that? You know, you hear a lot of stories of people who are, you know, sick with cancer or dying, and they learn this Tonglen practice, and it gives meaning to their sickness, right? They imagine taking on the sickness of everyone else, like experiencing the sickness so no one else has to. And it also cuts through the, you know, poor me mind. And a friend of mine died at the beginning of this year. You know, he had very, very, very painful cancer, you know, metastasized cancer to his bones. And he had this awful surgery, and he was just in so much pain. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche gave him this Tonglen practice to do. And you could see, you know, he's so uncomfortable. And then you'd remind him of the Tonglen practice, or you'd do it with him. And you just see his face, you know, start to relax, you know, his body start to relax. And so, so it's so helpful. And I notice for me too, if I'm going through a hard time and I remember to do the Tonglen practice, then, you know, cut through the self-pity part, and it makes it a lot more bearable, whatever difficulty there is. Yeah. Oh, all right. So then gradually, slowly, our love and compassion grows to the point where we're willing to take responsibility to free others from their suffering. And then that brings us to step number 10 of the 11-point method, which is the extraordinary attitude, or sometimes translated as the superior intention, right? So this is the highest level of great compassion, right? The great compassion, wishing all sentient beings are free from suffering, but not only wishing all sentient beings, right, without excluding anyone, to be free from suffering, but I myself will take responsibility. So this is something that organically will happen once our great compassion becomes stronger and stronger. Then I myself, I'm going to take responsibility, like the parent is going to take responsibility for their children. Right. The person who's willing to jump in and help, right? Run into the burning building to help, or jump into the lake or the ocean to help the drowning person, right? The person who takes, right, the parent who takes responsibility for their child's education, etc. And then based on having that extraordinary attitude, and then thinking, okay, well, how can I be of the greatest benefit, right? How can I, right? First of all, we're wanting to free sentient beings from their suffering forever, right? The bodhichitta attitude, right? Not merely on a temporary basis, but wanting beings to be free from suffering forever, and lasting, and attain lasting happiness and peaceful mind. Right. So how do we do that? Then we need to help free them from their mental afflictions. How do we do that? Well, we have to, hard for me to help free others from their mental afflictions if I still have mental afflictions. Maybe I need to get rid of my own mental afflictions, right? So I need to work on my own mind and attain complete enlightenment so that I have, I have the capacity of mind, and I have the wisdom of mind, and I have the, right, the clairvoyance of mind to know how to help others. Right? One of I think our biggest frustrations is, when we encounter someone we care about who's suffering, is knowing what to do, right? Knowing how to help. How can we actually help this person, right? And so only a Buddha, right? A Buddha has the omniscient mind that knows, that's said to know exactly what to say and what will help and whether that person is open to help. Right? To know what your karma is, to know the right thing to do that will actually bring help and not harm. Right? So based on the extraordinary attitude, we contemplate, well, how can we possibly bring others out of samsara, out of suffering forever? Well, only by myself attaining complete enlightenment can I truly have the capacity and the wisdom and the compassion to be able to, and the power, right, to be able to help bring others, guide others out of samsara. So bodhicitta, the compassionate wish to attain complete enlightenment in order to help all, for the welfare of all sentient beings. Yeah, so the motivating factor is great compassion and the extraordinary attitude. And then the means to help others is to attain complete enlightenment. Yep, so that's bodhicitta. And then bodhicitta has the two types. There's the wishing or aspiring bodhicitta and the engaging bodhicitta. So the wishing or the inspiring bodhicitta is the wish, the genuine wish to attain enlightenment for the welfare of all sentient beings. And then the engaging bodhicitta is on top of that, taking the bodhisattva vows, the vow to practice the six perfections in order to actually engage in bodhisattva activity. So the aspiring bodhicitta is like the wish to go, and then engaging bodhicitta is like getting on the plane or getting on the train and going there, right? So gradually, right? So initially, we try to develop some level of bodhicitta through doing these reflections, like effortful bodhicitta or what's called contrived bodhicitta. And then over time, it becomes stronger and stronger and becomes uncontrived or spontaneous, effortless bodhicitta, which is just there with you all the time. You don't have to make effort in doing it. You just automatically respond with bodhicitta. I remember once hearing this story about His Holiness the Dalai Lama, told by one of his, like, the security workers or bodyguards, where he was walking along, I think after a teaching, and someone like lunged toward him. Right. And so the typical human response, if someone lunges toward us, is, kind of reflexive, right? Away, right? Protecting ourselves. At least, a little bit. But this security person said that His Holiness Dalai Lama's instinctive reaction was a compassionate move toward the person who lunged at him. Like there was no reflexive action away. It was just this compassionate moving toward, like, what do you need? It was really moving, a moving kind of account, right? And so that's what is said to happen, right? More and more as our compassion becomes deeper, as our bodhicitta becomes deeper and more spontaneous, the natural inclination is to serve. The instinctive inclination is to serve more and more, and less to protect the me and the mine. Right? Yeah. So then, the last thing I wanted to mention about the Bodhisattva vow, well, actually, a couple of things. I wanted to first say that right, that this training is difficult, right? It's difficult. It's, of course, supposed to be difficult because we have a habit since beginningless time of being focused on me and my happiness first, right? And so in the beginning, right, doing this training is, right, in the beginning, it's the most difficult because we're trying to overcome that habit. And Geshe Sopa says it's like a small child trying to battle a grown man, right? So I resonated with that kind of little analogy, like the David and Goliath thing, right? But slowly, it becomes easier and more instinctive. And then I wanted to read something from Chogyam Trungpa on the Bodhisattva vow, because I find this just really beautiful. And then I'll end with a quote by Pabonka Rinpoche. He says, taking the Bodhisattva vow has tremendous power for the very reason that it is not something we do just for the pleasure of ego. It is beyond oneself. Taking the vow is like planting the seed of a fast growing tree, whereas something done for the benefit of ego is like sowing a grain of sand. Planting such a seed as the Bodhisattva vow undermines the ego and leads to a tremendous expansion of perspective. Such heroism or bigness of mind fills all of space completely, utterly, absolutely. The Bodhisattva vow is the commitment to put others before oneself. It is a statement of willingness to give up one's own enlightenment or one's own well-being, even one's own liberation for the sake of others. And a bodhisattva is simply a person who lives in the spirit of that vow. Taking the Bodhisattva vow implies that instead of holding on to our individual territory and defending it tooth and nail, we become open to the world that we're living in. It means that we're willing to take on a greater responsibility, immense responsibility. The sanity of this tradition is very powerful. What we're doing in taking the Bodhisattva vow is magnificent and glorious. But joining this tradition also makes tremendous demands on us. We no longer are intent on creating comfort for ourselves. We work with others. This implies working with our other as well as other. Our other is our projections and our sense of privacy and longing to make things comfortable for ourselves. The other is the phenomenal world outside, which is filled with screaming kids, dirty dishes, confused spiritual practitioners, and assorted sentient beings. So taking the Bodhisattva vow is a real commitment based on the realization of the suffering and confusion of oneself and others. The only way to break the chain reaction of confusion and pain And to work our way outward into the awakened state of mind is to take responsibility ourselves. If we do not deal with this situation of confusion, if we do not do something about it ourselves, nothing will ever happen. We cannot count on others to do it for us. It is our responsibility, and we have the tremendous power to change the course of the world's karma. So in taking the Bodhisattva vow, we are acknowledging that we are not going to be instigators of further chaos and misery in the world, but we are going to be liberators, bodhisattvas, inspired to work on ourselves as well as with other people. There's tremendous inspiration in having decided to work with others. We no longer try to build up our own grandiosity. We simply try to become human beings who are genuinely able to help others. That is, we develop precisely that quality of selflessness, which is generally lacking in our world. Following the example of Gautama Buddha, who gave up his kingdom to dedicate his time to working with sentient beings, we are finally becoming useful to society. Taking this Mahayana approach of benevolence means developing a sense of greater vision rather than focusing on our own little projects. We expand our vision immensely to embrace working with the rest of the world, the rest of the galaxies, the rest of the universes. And then finally, Pabonka Rinpoche says, if you work hard at this bodhisattva or bodhicitta training, I can assure you it is more worthwhile than working hard at and meditating on all sorts of less beneficial things that can fritter away your human rebirth, such as meditation on deities, reciting mantras, or trying to improve your meditative abilities. Oh, and sorry, one more thing. Geshe Sopa says that it will take time, but we will get there. It's a gradual process, but we'll get there. Okay. So let's dedicate. Yeah, let's dedicate toward our future genuine, uncontrived, spontaneous bodhicitta. May we continue to walk along that path to develop authentic bodhicitta and ultimately complete awakening, complete Buddhahood, in order to be more skillful, have more wisdom to help others, to relieve others from their suffering forever. Let's also dedicate for the peace in this world. happiness and the wellness of each and every sentient being. Okay, thank you very much. Have a wonderful holiday. Geshe Sherp's going to be teaching on the six perfections in January, so that'll be perfect.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you so much. We want to offer you a kata for all of your teachings. It's difficult to describe the value of your connecting us with the Dharma in these times especially, and so appreciate you reaching out to us in this way and offering us the chance to experience these teachings. And so we also look forward to seeing you on New Year's Eve, and I'm so glad and thankful that you were willing to we ask that you teach in the future, and I think I might have heard that you are interested in offering a book study in February, and so we're very thankful for that as well.
Ditto.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, all right. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for spending your Saturday mornings with me, on this subject. It's a big deal, right? It's a big deal to spend it's supposed to be an hour and 45 minutes, but it ends up being 2 hours every Saturday with me and talking about this. So thank you for your time and your attention, your energy, and your practice. Wish you well, and we'll maybe see you on New Year's Eve. And if not, we'll be doing the book study starting in February.
Great.
Thank you, Emily.
All right. Thank you, Emily.